We're on. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Medicine with a Mission podcast talking about faith, family, and the profession. This is episode 7, which will be the second day of National Athletic Training Month in March. And today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine. This is the first time we've physically seen each other on camera or face to face, but we've talked numerous times on the phone. I have personally done some interviews with him, and he'll share more about what he does. But Doug Horton is our guest today. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Paul, thanks for the opportunity.
Well, Doug, like I said, this is a time where I just want to hear your story. I think the people that will be viewing this on the multiple social media channels that we have would like to hear your story, where you are, what your job role is. I know you said I think you work for a radio station. You also do you teach at a local college and university. So just share with us what you do, your job role, and everything.
Yeah, no, Paul, I really appreciate it. And it is great to finally meet you face to face virtually, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah.
My job currently is I'm program director and clinical coordinator, a faculty member at Eastern University, which is located just right outside Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. I've been there since 2008 and actually graduated from there in 1999. So I kind of went back to my alma mater. That's where my wife and I met. And, there's a lot of changes that are going on with athletic training right now. So we actually currently have our last senior cohort in our undergraduate program that will be graduating, taking the board of certification exam, and entering the profession officially at the end of this year. So that does leave a little bit of question going forward, but I am taking some other classes, going to take on some other classes, anatomy and physiology, which, if you're an athletic trainer, the body has to be a passion of yours anyway. So I'm looking forward to that new challenge. That's in my life. Right now, we are not transitioning to a master's level program. We're hoping that that's going to be implemented maybe a few years down the road. But that's kind of the direction of athletic training where it's going right now. We're a little bit, taking a little bit of break, but hopefully we'll come back better and stronger than ever. You mentioned the radio stuff. So one thing with athletic training and teaching is that it affords me some flexibility to do some other things. And back in 2017, I partnered up with Rob Motti, who's a national writer for the Eagles and the Phillies through the Associated Press. And we started a radio show called Faith on the Field. And working with Rob over the last couple of years has been an awesome experience. We have a podcast that's out. You can go to our website, faithinthefieldshow.com, check out all of our episodes from 4 different seasons. And we're looking to expand across the country to different radio stations. Hopefully, the future goal would be on one radio station in every state. That'd be the ideal situation. Obviously, anybody can download the podcast, but that's where we're at right now. My real full-time job, though, is I have 5 girls, ranging from 16 to 2, and just kind of hanging out with them as much as possible, which for us, the quarantine and COVID has been a great time just to kind of reconnect and not be as busy as we normally would have been. So I appreciate the time with my daughters.
How have you, going back, we really don't like to go back to 2020, but we will. How did the pandemic and COVID and your job at the school and, even the radio program, how did all of that, how was your faith strengthened? How was your faith challenged? And during all that time, and how did with your 5 girls and your wife and, all this stuff, how did all that work together?
Yeah. So I think, especially during the spring, when you go back to maybe March of 2020, my biggest concern was at that time for my students and their uncertainty of what potentially the future would hold. I know my seniors at that time had delays in the BOC. Everybody got sent home. So their senior year, their rotations got cut short. So we had to pivot and adjust with how we delivered some of that. And so really it was a time for them to try and encourage them that even though this seems tragic, everybody's going through it. This is worldwide. This isn't just in our small world and what's happening at Eastern. Faith for university, that we would stay afloat, that God would provide, because obviously financially it's a tough situation for a lot of people. And then over the summer, it was kind of a time where there was still uncertainty leading into the fall. And what was the fall going to look like? And how were we going to come back? And were students going to be allowed on campus? So I think everybody's kind of faced that a little bit, right? You go through a short period of time and you're like, okay, well, this is our short-term plan, but what if that doesn't work out? So it's kind of just readjusting and really trying to trust God's plan for everything. And even if it doesn't work out how we want it, maybe he has something better, worse. I don't know. I just trust. And that's kind of been my testimony for the last couple of years. So kind of accepting God's will for my life has really just been something I've tried to embrace over the last couple of years, whether it's been a good situation or a bad situation. But like I said, for my family, we've drawn closer just through the situation. I'm thankful that God has provided for us, which has been great. So I haven't had any change with my normal job situation. Now I know that hurt a lot of athletic trainers, and I had a lot of preceptors, a lot of friends that really struggled when sports shut down, and they were either put in hospital situations or they're starting to be like working in COVID areas as far as like screenings. Um, my heart hurt for them because that was really tough. But personally, I'm blessed that I didn't necessarily have to worry about that, but I kind of felt the burden for other people that were struggling for it.
Now, you and I had talked just earlier this week or last week about before we set this meeting up. You did experience a tragedy in your family with your son, and you had mentioned, I would like for you to share about that, and that be the kind of the bulk of our interview of sharing what happened and how God provided in ways that you may have didn't realize and you realize now, and how that has really, I guess, strengthened and amplified your faith.
Yeah, no, Paul, it changed my entire testimony, really. I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian high school growing up. My dad taught eighth grade at a Christian school for 42 years, went to church, going to Eastern Christian school, kind of was in that Christian environment most of my life. After I graduated Eastern, I went to Indiana for my master's. So kind of got from the small school to the big school situation, and was able to come back, and I took a job with NovaCare Rehabilitation, which is a clinic outreach owned by Select Medical, which is a big company across the country. But I got to probably around 33 years old. This was about 2010, 2011, and really started questioning a little bit about how I was using my job and my platform to benefit Christ. It was more about what can I do? How can I move up in a company, or how can I offer better services? And it was more about my profession, and I kind of kept things separate. But around that time, I really prayed that God would just open some doors for him to use me. And that's always a tough prayer, right? Because I think we're kind of praying for something really cool to happen, or like, God, use me. But when you really lay it at God's feet, you have to accept the good and the bad. So if you say use me, it's kind of at his discretion of how he chooses to do that. And that you're like, well, just make sure it's a good thing, right? I don't necessarily make it bad. But he actually answered that prayer very quickly, and we were able to go through a church group and connections that we had, go to Haiti. And there was a tragic earthquake that happened in 2010. Our youth pastor at our church had connections for family members that were at a mission in Haiti. And so our church actually sent 4 teams, and I was able to go on 2 of those trips. And that was the first time I'd ever done a missions trip before. And I know that's something that's near to your heart too. When you talk about going to developing countries and kind of helping out with that. So great experience, and just kind of changed my perspective a little bit. Came back really on fire just to kind of help people out more and kind of use my life in that way. Fast forward till 2014. At that time, I had 3 older girls, and I had a son born in July. His name was Luke. And it was great. We had 3 girls, have a boy. And again, God's blessed us tremendously. However, in November 12th, 2014, he took a nap, and he passed away when he was sleeping. And that really, really rocked our world. And it was tragic. And, from an athletic training standpoint, to have be a part of a traumatic situation like that. That was the most tragic situation I've ever been a part of. And it's hard. It changes my perspective even as I teach emergency care and think through that. It just rings so different. I think any athletic trainer that's been through a really tragic situation, that stays with you. Any medical professional, that stays with you, and it's made me have a much deeper understanding and respect for people that deal with that, especially on a daily basis. When we think about our doctors and our frontline workers. But I mentioned that I grew up in a Christian home, and so really during that time, that was a decision where I said, okay, if I said, God, you can have my life, and this is what I've always known, I really had to make a decision. Even though this is the worst situation I could imagine, am I still going to trust God and his promises and his character? Or I figured I need to completely forsake it. And, my wife and my family, we really just embraced our faith and trusting God and saying, okay, God, you have a plan for us. And, my wife handles it differently than I do. My prayer was that if God would take Luke, that he would really use him for his glory. And Paul, honestly, like he has, and he's answered that prayer. Even though the pain is still there. And I think there's a difference, especially anybody that's talked to somebody that's lost someone. The comfort that we're given through tragedy doesn't replace the pain. It's still there. It's still messy. There's still really, really bad days, triggers, if you will, right? But the hope in Christ and his promises are what allows us to get through it. I kind of would understand why people would turn to other methods to try and soothe that pain, whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever other vice you would get into. And that changed my testimony, because one ministry that I was a part of would be to go into prisons and play softball with inmates and be able to share the gospel. And so sometime after that, I was able to go to Ohio on they call it a crusade, where we go for multiple days and play in multiple prisons. And I was able to share my testimony for the first time in prison and really kind of say, listen, I can understand why, when life has really knocked you down, that you may choose other things besides Christ to fill that void. And that became my testimony. And I think it resonated in the prisons. It also resonated with Rob, my buddy that I mentioned before. And his goal was to take Christ to his marketplace also as a reporter. And sharing kind of that passion and kind of God leading, we got together and we formed Faith on the Field. And through that, I was able to share Luke's story multiple times. Our third episode that we had 4 years ago, there was, if you remember, Isaiah Thomas was playing for the Boston Celtics. His sister had tragically died. Mm-hmm. And then Brandon Heath, who was a tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, his child had died. And it was national news that same week. And Rob looked at me and said, I think it's time to share about Luke. And, God orchestrated small things like that. That was a prayer request of ours. Like, when would be the right time? And I think that God's answered that prayer so many different times. And would probably need a couple more episodes with you in order to share everything. But if your eyes are open to seeing how God may work in situations, whether it's good or bad, and embrace that God still walks with us, even during tragedy, it's been a tremendous blessing that has drawn me closer in my relationship with God to understand him better through this. And again, I miss my son every day. It doesn't take the pain away. And I think some people say, well, you put your trust in God and you're going to be happy. And it's not that. It's really not. But it's a matter of finding that there's a hope for the future. Mm-hmm. There's a plan that as we walk. And honestly, Paul, to be able to share about Luke right now, this is an answer to prayer. That it's 6 years later, and I'm still able to talk about his life, what he meant to us, and how we dealt with that. And I feel like that's a way that God says, I'm still answering your prayer. I'm still with you. And that's what I embrace. And so we continue to walk the journey. And I pray that if somebody's gone through something and Luke's story or our testimony can help in a small way, that's really God reaching down to give them comfort and really trying to help them out in that situation. And so again, thanks for having me on to kind of talk about it. Yeah. But that really changed. That really changed a lot for us. Found great community. I think that's an important thing also, that our church came around us, and the people that we invest in, then when we really need them, they're able to invest back into us. And I thought that was a really big lesson. I know the athletic training community is tight like that, right? I mean, we take care of each other. And I kind of felt that through many different avenues, from my athletic training community, from my school community, to our friends, our church, family. All of them really came around us.
And I have, I personally, I mean, not outside of my mother passing back in 2013, but I have lost a coach, I've lost two athletes, and I've lost a referee in my almost 25 years of practice. And it's just listening to you, and I have other friends that have lost husbands, wives, children. And I don't think a lot of people realize that when you talk about, when you're to a point now to where even though it still resonates within your heart about Luke, and you still miss him every single day, you know where your hope is, who's in control of it, you know all this stuff. But I can promise you that when it first happened, you probably went through the gamut of emotions. You probably went through anger, questioning, doubt, fear, all this stuff. And I think we try to, when we talk about having faith and having hope, that we don't realize that it's okay to have all those emotions. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to question. It's okay to ask why. It's okay to ask him why. Same thing with my mom. I mean, 2013, I'm getting ready to go to work, and I get the phone call at 6:00 in the morning, and my whole life went, just collapsed within a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
And, there's still days where, I wish that I would have spent more time with her. I wish that I would have done these things and these things and these things. But I know that I know that I know that she's in a much better place. She is right where she needs to be, right in front of who she needs to be and be in front of. And that's what gives me comfort. That's what gives me the joy that I can have, that having her as my mom. Probably saying the same thing with you and Luke is it's okay to have all those emotions. And I think that once we can embrace that and understand that, but realizing that our faith is in Christ alone, that he is the one that will get us through it. And he is the one that gets us through it. So, so I imagine you had all those, had all those emotions. You still may have them.
Oh, absolutely. It's we, as a professor, as a teacher, right? You teach the 5 phases of death and dying and Kubler-Ross, and you put it on a PowerPoint slide, and you say, know all 5 of these, right? You're trying to tell the kids, and whatever acronym is, like, everybody's going to go through this, especially even in the rehabilitation process, right? An athlete gets injured, they're going to go through all of these processes, talk to them about their rehab, talk to them about the return to play. But Paul, it's real and it's messy, right? And I've never to experience it that way. I could put it on a PowerPoint slide, but I never experienced it before, right? I mean, I was injured as an athlete when I was younger, but not the same thing. And to really understand that you can go 2 steps forward and take 3 steps back. And there's certain days that are good, there's certain days that are really, really bad. How long it takes for you to even feel normal again, right? I liken it a little bit to having extremely long concussion symptoms that you just don't feel right for a really, really long time. And it's educational for me in one sense, to take the theory that we would teach and then to be like, wow, I have to accept it because that's what I'm actually going through right now. Because sometimes we feel like we could just keep plugging through. And I guess maybe that was some really good advice that I've actually been able to share with students that have lost a parent or gone through a difficult time, is changing the level of your own expectations during periods of time. You talk about, your world being rocked and it just crumbling. But then, how long is it okay for us to be able to wait before we go back to work? And how are we going to be when we go back to work? And how are we going to talk to other people? The best advice I got was, listen, if you show up, like, that is a huge win, right? Because it's near the end of the semester, it was November. And I tried to come back and they're like, lower your expectations. And I think when I talk to students about that sometimes too, that have gone through a tough time, to say, listen, this is what I know you can do, but if this is only what you're capable of this time, like that's okay too. And I
Yep.
think giving people permission to grieve, to suffer, um, and to go through the process without extra added pressure. I can't imagine people that have to go through it alone. I can't imagine people that are forced to shove that down without an avenue in order to get it out. And it's tough. And I think the best term is it's messy. And so as long as people can accept you in your messy state, um, then those are good people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Do you have a specific maybe verse or verses that
Yeah.
has, I mean, maybe through your whole life, but especially during that time and during this time that you have, I want to say, hang your hat on, cling to, held on to, meditate on, that I would really consider what I call your life verse or verses that you could share with us that and kind of give a background and story about that.
When I was a little bit younger, it was probably plans for us, and um, that he's going to direct our paths. Um, and I always kind of hung to that, but I kind of hung to that as like, okay, well, what job am I going to have next? What's that going to look like? That he's going to direct my paths through life. And I always thought of that as like, well, God's got me well, right? And that's always true. But God also directs our paths through the good and the bad. And our kind of family verse that we clung to is Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father that's in heaven. And we call it kind of Luke's light, that, Luke was one of those things where, uh, Chris and I had 3 kids before, my wife, Christine. But we would go to bed and we kind of look at pictures. Like we put the kids to bed and we would look at pictures of them and we're like, man, this is crazy that, we should take a break and separate. But Luke just had this smile and this glimmer in his eyes that resonated with people, that was on social media. Just, you're posting pictures of your kids or whatever, but he was a cute kid, and um, it just seemed like he had this light to him. And I think that was God using him or preparing people that would draw attention to him, where the message would be even bigger.
Mhm.
And, Luke was only 4 months old. So he didn't, play, he rolled around on the floor, but, he wasn't talking, he wasn't doing a whole lot. But the little guy made an impact in people's lives by Christ going through him
Mhm.
in such a tremendous way. And I'm so thankful for that. And so that verse is just everything that we try to live out now. And I tell my girls now, it's like, they go somewhere like, let your light shine, like be a light to a dark world. And if God could shine through Luke in his 4 months on earth, then what can we do when we take Christ to our marketplace and we take him to work with us, and we, in all our relationships, if we really try and let his light shine through us, not for our glory, right? It's not about us, but to say, this is my story and this is how God's used it. If he could shine light and warmth onto you, then praise be to him. But that's really been the verse that we've kind of clung to, as Matthew 5:16.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Doug, I appreciate you coming on with us and sharing about what you're doing, sharing about your faith and your family and your profession and how all that intertwines and is meshed together in your daily life. Good luck to Christine and her. I guess you said she got a new job.
Yeah, so she was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years. And I guess that kind of changed during the pandemic too. She took an online course, became licensed as a realtor in New Jersey. So
Awesome.
that's where we live. That's where I grew up. We both grew up. And so she's starting on her professional journey now too, which I'm sure she'll do great with. But
Nice. Awesome.
yeah.
Well, Doug, again, I thank you very much for joining us again on this edition. And like I said, he will be, this will be day 2 of March 2nd of National Athletic Training Month. And I'm It will be, this is episode 7 of Medicine with a Mission, Faith, Family, and the Profession. Doug, thanks very much, and we will talk to you soon.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate all the effort you do to make this happen and shine your light. So thank you, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.